Good morning. Today we're continuing our series with Charles Fillmore, book on prosperity, and we're working with chapters 5 and 6. Great titles, by the way, and the daily word perfect for today, but I'll let you read that yourself. The title of my talk today is called The Habit of Plenty. And, to say right now that our lifestyles and habits have changed would be a great understatement, as things have been just totally disrupted. I would say there's also a benefit. It has forced us to look at what's important to us and also to see what's no longer appropriate or needed. And on the other hand, it also has given rise to a lot of anxiety and fears. And for some of us, we've gone through both of those. So, would you be interested in exploring um, some habits that we could respond or react in a way that would actually be serving us rather than having a spiral in a direction we don't really want to go? So, one of the ways that we can change our state is by creating habits. And I looked up the word habit, and it means tendencies or behaviors that create involuntary actions. So, habits. When you woke up this morning, did you brush your teeth? Did you first make your bed? Did you check your emails? Did you go make a cup of coffee or a tea? When you got dressed, did you put your left shoe in first, put on first, or your right? Did you brush your teeth, exercise? All those things that we just automatically do and maybe not even think about are the results of habits. And we learned early, look both ways before crossing the street, brush your teeth. In fact, the very first habit I ever cultivated was deliberately was to brush my teeth in second grade because Scotty, little boy, had crush on, brushed his teeth. And before that, my mom and my sister would try to get me to brush my teeth, and I had no interest until, of course, Scotty did. And of course, you can imagine how much I got teased by my mother and my sister for that. If you think about the first time you learned to back a car out of a driveway, all of the mindfulness and the awareness that it took to actually perform that skill. And now we don't even think about it. So, in the book, The Power of Habit, Why We Do What We Do in Life and Business, Charles Duhigg says that habits are formed so as not to overwhelm our brain. They become automatic when we do three things: when we have a cue or trigger, when we have an action, a response, a routine, or a reaction, and when we have a reward. So, when they did experiments with mice and mazes, what they did is that in the maze they placed some cheese, and the mouse could smell the cheese. That smell was the trigger. Its response or its routine was to go through the maze to find the cheese. And if the cheese was kept in the same place, it would go back to it automatically and effortlessly. When they moved the cheese, they found that for the most part, the mouse kept going back to the same place a few times before it changed course to find the cheese. And it reminds me of how many times do we keep doing the same thing, expecting different results? Sometimes it may take a little bit for us to realize we may need to change course in order to get the cheese or whatever we're looking for. So whether it's a good habit or a bad habit, the brain doesn't really know the difference, but it's always looking for those three things: the cue, the action, and the reward. I call it the CAR, cue, action, reward. So in other words, with the cue, what do we do to get the reward? So another definition of habit means to dwell in. I have a friend who gets triggered every time she sees a couple holding hands. And she automatically goes into either this internal dialogue or she has to tell someone, I'm doomed. I'm never going to be with anyone ever in my life. And so her trigger is the couple, her action is her response is to go into this story. But funny or not so funny is that her reward is that she gets to be right about her assumption and her limiting belief. And I think many of us have done that. We have some outworn belief, but we keep holding on to it and expecting that it's going to give us something. So if this is a common tendency, would you be interested in knowing what to do when these triggers show up that actually create a positive habit instead? I just heard somebody in that through that screen go, absolutely. So, okay, I'm going to continue. Tiger Woods, a well-known golfer, would go over past videos with his father, and the question that his father would keep asking him when he would view these videos of his tournaments was, well, Tiger, what'd you do right? And he kept hearing it over and over again, and he began to internalize it. What did I do right? What did I do right? And what it did was he began to internalize it, of course, and it showed up as a mastery over a mindset. And of course, you could see the benefit of how that showed up in his career. What was interesting was after his father died, Tiger Woods found it very hard because his internal cue was gone. His cue was not only the video, but it was really his father. And he really couldn't progress the way he did before until he imagined his father right there with him again, saying, what did you do right? What did you do right? Small things, small changes in our lifestyle, small habits can create big results. Recently, I have lost almost 20 pounds. And what I noticed is that I needed to make some changes in my habits. And one of them was to slow down my eating. And that wasn't not easy at first. And in fact, what I noticed is that I started to get anxious when I started to slow down. And it took a lot of effort not to go back to my old habit at first. And the other thing that I noticed is that sometimes I wasn't even present. It was like I'd look down and I'd go, what happened to my meal? Where did it go? And on top of that, when I would eat, I would often, as a reward, eat in front of the television set. Like, oh, I only watch TV when I'm eating. That was my reward. And of course, it would contribute to not being present. And so I had to stop that. And what I began to notice is that I had some roots back in my childhood of emotional eating. And facing those, it was a bit vulnerable. And I had to face some of those feelings. But the bigger reward was that in facing those, I got to actually have some pretty positive results that contributed to my health and my well being. And there are spiritual laws that, if we followed some positive habits within these laws, would actually bring us some amazing results. So, in the book Prosperity by Charles Fillmore, he talks about working with the spiritual law of plenty. He says, first, what we need to do is to explore the fourth dimension within. We live in a society where we get stuck in our 3D world of conditioning. We allow they or them to determine who we think we are, actually determine a lot of how we behave in our life. And as we know, what would they think? And it's a trap. And it's easy to fall into these cultural norms and react without question. We can have regrets. Oh, I should be here by now. My bank account should be looking a certain way. We have regrets and fears, but to me, they're like weeds in a garden that have to be tended to and plucked, or they suffocate our healthy plants, our peace. We need to follow a road that's beyond ourselves into a deeper world and enter there. In the book, The Revealing Word by Charles Fillmore, he talks about the fourth dimension, and he says it's a transcendent realm where Jesus called it the kingdom of the heavens. It's the spiritual realization that includes the three dimensions of time, space, and conditions, but it also goes beyond them to experience the consciousness of a greater reality working with the law of substance. So, what is substance? Now, some of this we actually covered before, because in Charles Fillmore's books, in his chapters, there is a continuum. We're going to take it in a little different slant. So the Revealing Word says substance is the mysterious, divine, potent energy, the underlying reality of all things. It is the energy of behind all ideas. It sustains and enriches any idea that's projected onto it. And as we keep our mind filled with mind substance, this inner abundant reality, it can't help but to manifest in our lives. This law is fulfilled by entering into our oneness with God mind. So Charles Fillmore taught over 100 years ago that all substance flows from the realm of light waves. All substance flows from the realm of light waves, and we give form to the formless. So we know in modern physics that that's so, that ideas exist in the invisible realm, which is like a wave formation, and it's a potential that collapses into a particle when we expect certain things. So it moves from probability or possibility into probability by what we expect. And Charles Fillmore said that everything that we see began first as an idea. And all matter is the result of a spent force, of a spent idea. So that rather than us spending our life force fretting over the results of the idea, he says, why not move back into the causal realm of creating with new ideas? So he says, to have lasting prosperity, handle ideas, not just handle money. He says, ideas are potent seeds in the invisible realm. So imagine that these seed ideas are moving in and through your experience to realize what's possible. Like a photographic plate, we set an idea or an image to show up into our life. And he says, don't go begging God for things as if God is separate from you. Take God into all your affairs when you're looking for a solution. He says, stop looking out there and look within to find your supply. Within is the substance and the power. So I'm going to share a few ideas, obviously from this book, but also from a book called It's Not Your Money by Tosha Silver. You know, when we get triggered, we can either automatically respond or react, or we can cultivate 5 habits of plenty. And the more we practice them, the more and easier the habit becomes. So I want to go over these 5 habits. So the first habit is the invitation. It's to invite love to do the work, to open you to give and receive more easily. She said, love fulfills the law. When you love God, when you love your work, when you love others, when you love yourself. And love moves us from being in scarcity to being abundance itself. She said, be the love offering. Be what you wish to have. If you want to have more love, be more loving. If you want to have more peace, be peaceful. True prosperity consists of being rich toward God, according to Charles Fillmore. You know, in the book Myrtle, Mother of Unity, Myrtle writes this: I can remember in the early days of the work when it seemed like my lot was to receive hand-me-downs or cast-off clothes that were given me. I decided to go to the Father about it. And I said, now, Father, I'm looking for you for my pay, for my provisions, and for my clothes. If this is what I've earned in making myself ready to receive, and in doing that which has come to me to do, well, okay, well and good. She said, then I wrote little notes of praise and gave thanks for the needs met before the supply was visible, and the good increased. I set not my heart on the increase, but more lovingly on the giver. So, first habit, invite love to give. Invite love to open you to give and receive. Habit number 2, clear it out. To be more open, more spacious, more present, you got to clear out the clutter. You got to make room. You know, I still have in my garage from 2015 when my mom passed a lot of her things. And there's a lot of emotion that's attached to stuff. Have you noticed that? And when we start to try to move out the stuff, we've got to face a lot of feelings. And so for right now, I'm actually making it okay that that stuff is there. Um, but in Tosha Silver's book, she makes it a little bit easier for me to go back and actually work with it. And she said, first of all, it's not your stuff. It's not even your life. It's God's stuff. And she said, offer your belongings to the divine. After all, it's God's, not yours. In fact, it's God's life, not yours either. And she said, give love permission to show you what you no longer need. If you have to set a timer for a half hour to go through and release things, ask to be shown what to be released. Ask love to show you what needs to go. In Chinese feng shui, they would say, move the stagnation out so you can make space for what wants to show up instead. And to clear clutter thinking, we have to clear out our old stories. Are they really worth recycling that energy and to bring it into our present moment? And she said, give your resentments and your regrets to God. Let go of that clenched fist and have an open hand through the power of forgiveness to be able to actually be aware of the loving awareness that's holding you. Ask love to forgive through you. Clear it out. Habit number 3, stop the lack train. As an experiment, how about if we stop complaining about lack or money for just 24 hours? And then when we do that, perhaps commit for another 24 hours if you're interested in developing this habit and deepening it. She said, stop insisting that you can't, or that you don't have enough, or that you aren't enough. Stop feeding yourself that poison that stops the flow of receiving your good. You know, it's the nature of our ego to feel contentious about something, about anything, almost as if it feels like it wouldn't exist if it didn't have something to be bracing up against. But you know, if we were to just deny the negative payoff of feeding that old story, it actually gets easier. You know, new thought thinkers would call this error consciousness, because we make the mistake of thinking that our well-being comes from external circumstances. Because when we do, any setback feels like a threat to our survival. I mean, look what's happening in the world today. So often we make money and possessions our measure of satisfaction in life. And then we worry about the accumulation of wealth or the lack of for our peace, rather than focusing on our spiritual health for our peace. It's been tempting lately when people ask me during this COVID time, how's my business doing? I could give a very sad story. Of course, you know, there are people that are much worse off than I am. And instead, I do want to be real and I want to be mindful energetically. And so I've said, well, I'm staying in trust and watching my business grow steadily. So Charles Fillmore says, as you dissolve one thought and put another in its place, what you're doing is that you are practicing having dominion. And of course, when we slip, we can begin again. Those lasting habits happen because we practice and we keep choosing again. Satosha says, ask love to make you ready for a better story. And for now, whatever you're facing, give it to the divine for the highest outcome. She recommends putting your problems in a God box. She says, offer it fully and ask for the right action to be shown. And when you start to get a little anxious about whatever it is that you're facing, she said, remind yourself, hey, that belongs entirely to the God, into that God box. I gave it 100% to God. And I'm casting my burden off for a holy solution. And she said, surprisingly, when she would later go through the God box, she would find that a lot of those situations that she was worrying about got resolved. She invites us to remember our spiritual identity. You are of God, and your I am identity can save you from any negative thought. Deny that you're separate from God, from your good. So stop the lecturing. Habit number 4, bless. Find one thing to be grateful for. And the more that you're grateful, the more you're going to find things to be grateful for. They just keep showing up. Actually, blessings shift neurotransmitters in the brain. And the more we bless, we increase those places of gratitude, and the more then, in contrast, we shrink the complaining neurotransmitters. Bless your life to increase the quality of your life. Bless as an act of giving. Bless as an act of setting the law of increase into motion even before you see the results. What did Jesus do? He would give thanks in advance. She said, cultivate the habit of seeing abundance everywhere. Not only in our imagination, but what we see. And if we see someone who's manifesting abundance, bless them and feel and take in that vibration as if you're claiming it as your own. And respect what you do have, even if it seems small. And even if you don't think you can give a lot, give of your talents. That's how we increase them. Bless your bills as you pay them. Bless your tithes, your love offerings, to demonstrate the law of increase. Bless even your dimes and your nickels Actually, I have a friend who took the law of tithing on, and immediately what she found is that she found 3 dimes in the road. And so she took 10% of what she said, this isn't my money, this is really God's money, so I've got to give 10% back to my source. So she put aside 3 cents, and it began to accumulate. And every week, then she would give of her tithe of whatever she earned or whatever she found. And she said, to her amazement, dimes start showing up everywhere. And I witnessed it with her. She would just start picking them up left and right. And it was almost like this call and response from her and the divine of this incredible agreements that they had. And her abundance kept increasing. Because not only did she expect it, but she playfully and lovingly and joyfully gave. She gave back. Recently, I read about a man who went to Brazil to work at a homeless shelter. And when he was there, he met this woman in her 90s who invited him into her home. And at one point, she said, I feel compelled to give you something. And she went over to her Bible and she pulled out her rosary and she gave it to him. And she said that this rosary was her mother's, and she's had it her whole life. And he felt his only response was to say thank you, knowing that it was a God-inspired act. And he said he looked around and she had nothing. And he was so moved that he gave one of her most precious possessions to him. He says, you know, when we think we have nothing to give, think again. It may be we always have something to give. It may be a kind word or a gesture. And he said he spent the rest of that day actually sharing stories and miracles that she had witnessed in her life, and many of the miracles in that very room. He said that moment for him was a set point in his life. And in that moment, because he was so moved, he dedicated his life not only to inspire, but to empower others, as he had felt empowered by her simple yet profound gesture. So no matter how little or how much we have, bless it, be grateful for it, and set that law of increase into motion. And remember, we always have something to give. And the fifth habit is to be a grateful receiver and to receive with ease. So what if we were to just drop the resistance and be open to receive? You know, some of us are great givers, but lousy receivers. Are we willing to prepare room for divine residency? To build a love affair with Spirit, to be pursued by God? Are we willing to focus that it could be easy, to be receptive, and to allow more and more good to show up in our lives? To affirm, you know, it's easy for me to receive. Just say that with me. It's easy for me to receive. Hey, God, surprise and delight me. And let the help come. offer your tragedies to the divine. Offer it all. Turn it all over to the divine. Ask love to do for you what you can't do for yourself. Then you will discover that you have always been in an endless ocean of provision. Relax into that. I dare you. And when we allow certain ideas of plenty, despite appearances, to show up in our mind's eye, then magnetically outer experiences show up to match those new ideas. So invite the divine plan to work through you specifically, and then follow those promptings. Commune with Spirit and ask for ideas to come from a higher dimension. And then be open to receive. Be wide open. Wider than you ever could possibly imagine. It's like water. It flows into the vessel that's been prepared for it, whether it be a thimble, a bucket, or an ocean. And don't make demands on having whatever you're asking for to look a specific way. Expand your mind to the infinite rather than cramming the infinite into your mind. Give it freedom to work. So be a gracious receiver. Charles Fillmore talks about the golden key. He says, I take my focus off the condition and place it on God, holy. I stop admiring the harvest and start admiring the indwelling presence. I admit I'm powerless over the effects of my conditioning, and I ask God to provide the remedy. I admit of myself I'm clueless and I'm limited, but that the God in me is infinite in every aspect and has the power to take me beyond appearances and beyond this simple existence. He says, people complain that their prayers aren't answered, but often they're not open to see the answers and the guidance when it is given. He says, your job is to stay in peace and focus on this inner treasure house. Keep your abundance by focusing on the inner reality, that this abundance is greater and far more provisional than we could ever imagine. Keep affirming your good. Keep praying until it becomes a habit of mind, and trust in the simplicity of this law. And in the book, Keep a True Lent by Charles Fillmore, he says this law very simply. I would say to everyone who wishes to demonstrate prosperity, just make it a habit to bring God into partnership with you, and you'll demonstrate prosperity. Have God be your silent and not so silent partner. So I've been tending to my garden lately, so I'd like to close with summarizing these 5 garden habits of plenty. 1. Invite love, the sun, the master gardener who's always on site. Invite love to do the work. 2. Clear out the weed thinking. 3. Stop the erosion and the toxins by thinking lack. 4. Bless the plant. Bless it with fertilizer. Feed it. Watch it grow. And 5, receive the bounty. So, the next time you get triggered, you get to choose to either act or react, depending on which reward, positive or negative, you're looking for. Tend to good habits when it's easy. So when the going gets tough, it becomes, well, a habit.